The night it all began, the city was glowing with the quiet hum of success. My daughter, Emily, was celebrating her 10th wedding anniversary at an elegant rooftop restaurant downtown, surrounded by friends in glittering dresses and men in tailored suits. I was there too, sitting at the far end of the table, trying to fit into a world that no longer felt like mine. At 65, my reflection in the polished wine glass seemed older, smaller, almost transparent compared to the confident faces around me. Emily, radiant in her silver gown, barely looked my way except to give polite instructions. "Mom, can you pass the bread?" Or, "Mom, please take a picture of us." I smiled, as I always did, swallowing the familiar ache of being needed only for small, convenient things. When the waiter poured champagne and everyone raised their glasses, Emily stood up laughing. "A toast to my amazing husband, to our beautiful friends, and to my mom," she said dramatically, glancing toward me. I felt a rush of warmth, until she added with a smirk, "For always saving us when things go wrong. She's basically our family's financial safety net." The table erupted in laughter. I forced a smile, even as my heart cracked a little more. "Don't look so serious, Mom," she teased. "You know it's true." Her husband, Mark, patted my shoulder. "We couldn't do it without you," he said casually, as though that were something to be proud of. I looked at them, my daughter and the man she'd chosen, and realized how little they saw me as a person. To them, I was a backup plan, a checkbook with wrinkles, a woman whose worth came from her willingness to give. They didn't know how many nights I'd sat at the kitchen table, calculating bills, figuring out how to stretch my small pension so I could cover their emergencies. They didn't know that the beautiful apartment they lived in, the one they bragged about on social media, was still half paid for by me. Or maybe they did know, and simply didn't care. After dinner, Emily pressed a kiss to my cheek before turning back to her friends. "Mom, don't forget, Mark's car insurance is due next week, and I'll send you the details, okay?" Her voice was sweet, automatic, transactional. She didn't notice the silence that followed her words, or maybe she didn't care. I nodded as always. "Of course, dear." But something in me shifted that night, a small, silent fracture that would change everything. When I got home to my modest apartment, I set my purse on the table and just stared at the empty space around me. The air felt heavier than usual, filled with years of unspoken exhaustion. I'd always believed that being a mother meant sacrifice, that love meant saying yes, even when it hurt. But that night, I began to question whether love should cost so much, whether being a good mother meant disappearing entirely. I made myself tea and sat by the window, watching the city lights fade into the horizon. Somewhere in that quiet darkness, I made a decision I didn't yet understand. I would no longer live like this. The next morning, the phone buzzed with messages. "Mom, can you transfer $500 for the utilities? We forgot this month." "Mom, Mark's credit card payment bounced again. Can you cover it?" "Mom, can you send something for Lily's ballet recital costume?" 3 different requests before breakfast. I looked at the screen, reading their words like someone seeing a familiar language for the first time, and realizing they no longer understood it. My thumb hovered over the send button, but this time it didn't move. I put the phone down and let it ring again, unanswered. Later that afternoon, I walked to the bank. The air was crisp, the kind that carries the scent of autumn and change. The young teller smiled politely as I handed over my ID. "I'd like to close 2 of my joint accounts," I said calmly, "and remove any additional users from my cards." Her fingers hesitated on the keyboard. "Are you sure, ma'am? These accounts are shared with—" "I'm sure," I interrupted gently. "Completely sure." With every click of her keyboard, I felt something heavy lifting from my shoulders. Years of quiet resentment, years of invisible servitude, slipping away like smoke. When I got home, I unplugged my house phone for the first time in years. The silence that followed was unfamiliar, almost sacred. I made myself dinner, a simple bowl of soup, and ate slowly, savoring each spoonful as though rediscovering the taste of my own choices. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel obligated. I just felt free. That night, I opened my old photo albums. There was Emily as a child, laughing in her school uniform, holding my hand at the park. I remembered how fiercely I had loved her, how I had promised myself that she would never feel the loneliness I had known growing up. Somewhere along the way, That love had turned into servitude. I had mistaken giving everything for loving unconditionally. But love without respect isn't love, it's a slow erasure. And I was done being erased. I closed the album and looked at the mirror across the room. The woman staring back wasn't weak. She was tired, yes, but there was strength beneath the wrinkles, a quiet, defiant kind of strength. For the first time, I whispered to my reflection, "No more." And I meant it. 2 days later, my phone began to ring relentlessly. First it was Emily, then Mark, then numbers I didn't recognize but knew belonged to them. I didn't answer. I watched the phone vibrate across the kitchen counter while I stirred my tea. Each was a reminder that for the first time in years, they needed something from me that I wouldn't give. The silence after the call stopped was delicious. It filled the apartment like a melody I had forgotten existed. But peace never lasts long in families built on expectation. By noon, there was a pounding on my front door, loud, impatient, entitled, "Mom, open up." Emily's voice, sharp and panicked. "We need to talk." I stood quietly in the hallway, unseen, my hand hovering near the doorknob. Through the door, I could hear Mark muttering something under his breath. "This is ridiculous. She can't just shut everything down." Then Emily again, pleading now. "Mom, please. You froze the cards. None of them work. We were at dinner with Mark's colleagues, and the payment got declined in front of everyone. It was humiliating." Her voice cracked, not with remorse but with embarrassment. "Do you know how that looked?" I took a slow breath. I could almost see her through the wood, perfect hair, expensive coat, the practiced expression of a woman who had always known how to get her way. Once upon a time, I would have opened the door immediately, apologized, said something like, "It must be a mistake, dear." But not this time. I let them knock, their voices rising and falling like waves against a shore that no longer cared to be eroded. Finally, when the noise became unbearable, I called out calmly, "Go home, Emily." There was a long pause. "What?" she said, as if the words were in a foreign language. I said, "Go home. We'll talk when you're ready to listen, not demand." Mark's voice joined hers now, low and edged with anger. "You can't just cut us off. We've got bills, responsibilities, your granddaughter's school fees, for God's sake." "Then maybe it's time you start handling them like adults," I replied, steady and cold. There was silence, then the unmistakable sound of frustration, a fist against the door, then retreating footsteps. Through the peephole, I saw them storm back to their car. Emily was crying, gesturing wildly while Mark rubbed his temples. The car pulled away in a screech, but I knew this was far from over. People like them didn't give up after one failed attempt. They regrouped. They strategized. That night, as I sat by my window again, I felt both the weight and the lightness of my decision. The quiet was unfamiliar, almost unnerving. My whole identity had revolved around being needed. For so long, I defined my worth through their crises. Now, without those constant demands, I didn't quite know who I was. Freedom, I realized, is often accompanied by loneliness. But it was a loneliness I was willing to learn to live with. The next morning, I received a message from my sister, Claire. "Emily called me. She's worried about you. Said you're acting strange and cutting them off for no reason." No reason. The phrase burned in my chest. For 30 years, I had provided reasons. I replied simply, "I'm fine, Claire. Just tired of being everyone's solution." That afternoon, Emily showed up again, alone this time. Her makeup was flawless, her perfume faintly sweet, but her eyes were cold. She didn't knock this time. She just stood on the porch and called through the door. "Mom, this is childish. I've talked to Claire. She's worried. Everyone is. Please stop making a scene." A scene. That's what this was to her, a minor inconvenience in the image she had so carefully curated. I opened the door a crack, enough for her to see me, but not enough to step inside. "I'm not making a scene, Emily. I'm making a boundary." She blinked, confused. "What does that even mean?" "It means," I said softly, "that my money, my time, and my love are no longer yours to take for granted." Her expression hardened. "You're being dramatic. You can't just pull the rug out from under us. We've got plans, commitments. Lily's dance tuition, the mortgage." "You have 2 salaries," I interrupted. "You'll manage." Mom, we've built our life around your help. You can't expect us to just survive. I asked quietly. Yes, I can. You're adults. You should have learned long ago. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't the tears of realization. They were the tears of frustration, of losing control. You don't understand, Mom, she said. People will talk. They'll think you're human, I said, and closed the door gently. The click of the lock echoed like thunder in the still house. For a moment, I pressed my hand against the cool wood, my heartbeat steady. I wasn't angry anymore. Just empty, but in a way that felt like space being cleared for something new. That night, I sat down with my notebook and started listing everything I had paid for in the last 10 years. House repairs, vacations, tuition, car loans. Every line on the page was another small piece of myself that I had given away without ever being asked if I could afford it, not just financially, but emotionally. By the time I reached the end, the total was staggering, over $70,000. Money I would never see again. But more painful than the number was the realization that I had spent it trying to buy love and respect that should have been freely given. I closed the notebook and felt something inside me settle. The anger, the sadness, the guilt, they didn't vanish, but they stopped controlling me. I thought of Emily's face at the door, the disbelief in her eyes when I told her no. She wasn't used to boundaries because I had never set them. I had taught her that love meant obedience, that generosity had no limits, that her comfort mattered more than my peace. And now, for the first time, I was unteaching her. It would hurt her. It already did. But maybe, just maybe, it would save her too. When I went to bed that night, I didn't check my phone. I didn't replay our conversation in my head. I simply lay there, feeling the steady rhythm of my heartbeat, the sound of rain against the window, and a small, growing certainty deep in my chest. For the first time in decades, I wasn't living for anyone else. I was living for me. The following week began with a silence, so thick it almost hummed. My phone, once buzzing with demands, now sat mute on the coffee table, no missed calls, no texts, no reminders that I was required elsewhere. The absence was unnerving at first, like waking up in a house that had suddenly lost its heartbeat. I found myself glancing at it often, waiting for a message that didn't come. But slowly, that silence began to shift, to breathe, to feel less like punishment and more like peace. I started to notice small things, the sound of wind rustling the maple tree outside, the soft ticking of the kitchen clock, the way sunlight pooled on my wooden floor like spilled honey. These details had always been there, yet I'd never had the time to see them. My life had been dictated by other people's emergencies, their chaos wrapped in a smile and called love. But now, each quiet moment felt like reclaiming a territory I didn't know I'd lost. Still, peace is rarely left unchallenged. On Thursday, the first ripple arrived. Claire, my sister, called again, her tone both sympathetic and suspicious. Dana, I've just spoken to Emily. She says you've been acting distant. Are you sure you're all right? I could hear the judgment between the words. I'm fine, I said. Actually, better than fine. I'm just taking a break from being everyone's safety net. A pause. You know they rely on you. Lily's at a delicate age. You don't want her to see you as heartless. Heartless! I repeated softly. For saying no. You've always been the strong one, Dana. Don't let pride ruin your family. I almost laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. Pride. That's what they called it. Not survival. Not exhaustion. Just pride. The invisible label society gives women the moment they stop serving without complaint. After that call, I realized Emily and Mark had begun weaving their narrative. They were reaching out, to my sister, to my cousins, to old family friends. I started receiving polite but pointed messages. Hope everything's okay between you and Emily. Or family is everything, you know. Try not to let small issues grow. It was subtle manipulation dressed as concern. I could almost see their dinner conversations, the carefully crafted versions of me they must have painted, the irrational mother, the stubborn old woman who'd lost her sense. But something inside me refused to crumble this time. The guilt they tried to plant in me no longer found fertile ground. I let the calls go unanswered, the messages unread. Instead, I began pouring my energy into myself, a phrase that used to sound selfish, but now felt sacred. I pulled out my old easel from the attic, dust-covered, forgotten. Painting had once been my secret joy before motherhood had swallowed all my hours. My fingers trembled slightly as I dipped the brush into color for the first time in years. The scent of turpentine filled the room. Stroke by stroke, I began to reclaim not just space, but identity. I painted without plan, bursts of blue, streaks of gold, tangled shades of red. It was messy and beautiful, like emotion turned visible. In those hours, time stopped belonging to anyone but me. There were no interruptions, no frantic calls, no guilt whispering that I should be doing something useful. For once, I was enough without being needed. 3 days later, Emily broke her silence, this time through an email. The subject line, "We need to talk, for Lily's sake." I hesitated before opening it. The message was long, polished, strategic. She wrote about how confusing it was for Lily not to hear from her grandmother, how worried she was that I was isolating myself, how hard life had become since I'd frozen the accounts. The guilt was woven so skillfully that for a brief moment, I almost fell back into old habits. But then near the end, I saw it, the truth hidden behind polite phrasing. "We just need temporary access to the funds again until we get things sorted. You've always been so generous, Mom. Don't let anger undo all you've built for this family." There it was. Not love, not understanding, just need, disguised as concern. I stared at the words for a long time, feeling both sad and strangely proud. They still didn't understand that I wasn't angry. I was awake. That night, I drafted my reply carefully. "Emily, I love you and Lily deeply, but love is not the same as funding. I am no longer your bank. If you wish to visit, I'll welcome you. But my money and my time are now my own. Take care of your family, as I once did for mine. Mom!" I hit send before I could second-guess myself. My hand trembled, but not from fear, from power. 2 days passed before she responded. Her reply was short, sharp. "Fine. Do what you want. Don't expect us to come running when you're lonely." The words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. For a long time after, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall. There was no denying it. Part of me had hoped that by setting boundaries, I'd also inspire understanding. Instead, I had built a wall they refused to climb. But as the night deepened, another thought began to form, softer, braver. Maybe this was what real motherhood was supposed to look like. Not blind sacrifice, but teaching your children that love doesn't mean submission. That self-respect is not rebellion. That weekend, I went to the community center and signed up for an art exhibition, something I'd always dreamed of but never dared to do. The coordinator, a kind woman named Julia, smiled when she saw my work. "There's a lot of feeling here," she said. "You should title this piece something powerful." I thought for a moment, then said, "Inheritance." She raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. What does it mean?" "It means," I replied, "this is what I'm leaving behind. Not money, not guilt, but the lesson that boundaries are the most valuable thing we can pass down." As I walked home that evening, the air smelled of rain and new beginnings. For the first time in decades, I wasn't walking toward someone else's crisis. I was walking toward my own life. 2 months passed. The distance between me and Emily had become a canyon, wide, echoing, and in its own way peaceful. The first few weeks had been hard. There were nights when I'd glance at my phone and almost call her, only to remind myself that love doesn't mean surrender. Slowly, I stopped expecting her voice. I learned to fill my evenings with something quieter, a book, a walk, the smell of rain on my balcony. The silence that had once felt heavy now became a companion, soft and grounding. Then one morning, as I was finishing my coffee, my doorbell rang. I froze, the cup halfway to my lips. Through the peephole, I saw Mark standing there alone. His face was thinner, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He held a crumpled envelope in his hand, shifting nervously from foot to foot. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home, but something about his posture, the defeated slump of his shoulders, made me open the door. "Mark," I said carefully. "Dana," he nodded, his voice rough. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside wordlessly. He walked in, looking around the living room as though it had changed somehow, though everything was exactly as he'd left it months ago. I gestured toward the sofa, and he sat, the envelope clutched tightly in his hand. "Emily doesn't know I'm here," he began. "She'd be furious if she did. That's not a good start," I said, crossing my arms. He gave a small, humorless smile. "Probably not, but I don't know who else to talk to." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "Things aren't good, Dana. The house payments fell behind. We had to pull Lily out of her dance program. Credit cards are maxed. I took a second job, but it's not enough. Emily's been trying to keep up appearances. You know her, but it's falling apart." I listened quietly, not out of coldness, but because I needed to understand the shape of his words. The old me would have jumped in with comfort. Maybe a check, maybe a plan. But this time I stayed still. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said softly. "But I can't fix it for you." "I'm not asking for money," he said quickly, and to my surprise, I believed him. He paused, voice cracking slightly. "I just wanted to say I get it now. What you did, why you did it. When you've been given something too easily, you forget what it's worth." I felt my throat tighten. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The house was filled with quiet honesty, something that had been missing from this family for years. Finally, he handed me the envelope. "These are receipts, proof that we've started paying off what we owe. I don't know if it matters to you, but it matters to me." I took it, feeling the weight of paper heavier than any money I'd ever given them. "It matters," I said. "It really does." Mark stood to leave, but hesitated at the door. "She'll hate that I came here," he said. "She'll come around," I replied. "She just needs time to face herself." He gave a weary smile. "I hope you're right." And then he was gone. That night, I sat with the envelope on my lap, staring at the neat rows of numbers, electricity bills, mortgage payments, even small debts I hadn't known existed. Each one represented a step toward accountability, a sign that maybe, just maybe, something inside that house was changing. But Emily didn't call. Not that day, not that week. Her silence now felt intentional, an act of pride rather than pain. Still, I didn't chase it. I'd spent too many years chasing. Instead, I poured my energy into preparing for the art exhibition. The gallery was small but full of life. White walls, warm lights, a low hum of conversation. My paintings hung among others, vibrant and unapologetic. When the curator announced my name, I felt my knees tremble slightly. People stopped to look at my work, to ask questions. One woman touched my arm gently and said, "Your piece inheritance, it feels personal, like freedom painted on canvas." I smiled, the kind that came from deep within. "It is," I said simply. For the first time in decades, people saw me not as a provider, not as someone's mother or wife, but as myself, a woman with a story, a voice, a perspective. That night, as I walked home with my paintings wrapped in brown paper, I felt the kind of pride that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. The next morning, there was a letter in my mailbox. No name, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Emily's. My heart pounded as I unfolded it. "Mom, Mark told me he came to see you." I was angry at first. Then I wasn't sure what I felt, ashamed maybe. "You were right. We got too comfortable letting you carry us." I was so busy trying to look like everything was perfect that I didn't see how much I was taking from you. I still don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to be humble enough to ask for forgiveness, or strong enough to live without your help. But I'm trying. For Lily. For us. She misses you. She drew a picture of you yesterday. You're holding her hand under a big yellow sun. She said you looked happy. Maybe someday we can have tea again. Not as mother and dependent daughter, but as two women who finally see each other clearly. Emily. By the time I finished reading, tears blurred the ink on the paper. I sat in the sunlight filtering through my window and let myself cry, not from sadness but from release. For years, I had been teaching my daughter all the wrong lessons, that love meant sacrifice, that strength meant silence, that generosity meant losing yourself. But now, finally, she was learning the truth, and so was I. I placed her letter next to my painting supplies and whispered to no one in particular, "Maybe this is what inheritance truly means." That night, I made 2 cups of tea, one for myself and one for the possibility of forgiveness. I set the second cup on the opposite side of the table, just in case someday soon, Emily might walk through that door again. Not to take, not to demand, but simply to share the quiet. The following Sunday dawned with a softness that felt almost deliberate, the kind of morning where the air itself seems to whisper forgiveness. The light that streamed through my kitchen window carried no rush, no burden. It touched everything gently: the chipped teacup, the vase of half-wilted lilies, the framed photograph of Emily holding baby Lily on the porch years ago. I looked at that photo and smiled. Not the kind of smile that hides pain, but the one that accepts it. I had decided that day to walk into town, something I hadn't done in years. My legs were slower now, but my steps felt lighter. The trees were beginning to shed their leaves, shades of amber and rust swirling in the breeze like little echoes of change. I stopped at a bakery I used to take Emily to when she was a child. The same scent of cinnamon rolls filled the air. For a moment, I was 25 again, holding her small hand, listening to her laughter fill the shop. "Mrs. Walker?" The voice was soft, hesitant. I turned, and there she was. Emily stood near the door, holding a paper bag, her eyes uncertain. She looked smaller than I remembered, not in size but in presence. The confident daughter who once commanded every room now seemed fragile, almost shy. For a second, neither of us moved. The air between us was thick with everything unspoken, years of dependence, guilt, silence, love. "Hi, Mom," she said finally, her voice trembling. I could have said so many things. Why now? Or what changed? But all I managed was, "Hi, sweetheart." We stood awkwardly, like strangers meeting after a long war. Then, she took a hesitant step forward. "I was hoping I'd run into you. Lily's been asking to see you. We thought maybe we could visit this afternoon, if you're okay with that." There was no manipulation in her tone this time, no entitlement. Just genuine hope. "I'd like that," I said quietly. When she smiled, it was small but real, the first honest smile I'd seen from her in years. She handed me the paper bag. "Cinnamon rolls. I remembered you love them." I laughed softly. "You remembered right." That afternoon, when they arrived, I felt nervous, almost absurdly so. I'd faced down financial ruin, loneliness, guilt, and yet the thought of seeing my granddaughter again made my hands shake. But the moment Lily ran up the steps and threw her arms around me, everything inside me melted. "Grandma!" she shouted, her voice bright and full of sunshine. "Mom said you were painting now. Can I see?" Her innocence disarmed me completely. "Of course, darling. Come on." We walked into my little studio. The walls were covered with my paintings, landscapes, emotions, memories turned into color. Lily's eyes went wide. "They're beautiful," she whispered. Emily followed slowly, her gaze sweeping the room. She stopped in front of Inheritance, the piece that had defined my rebirth. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a soft voice, "I saw a photo of this online. It's different in person. Stronger." I nodded. "It's about us," I said. Her eyes filled with tears. "I know." We stood there, side by side, not as mother and daughter locked in battle, but as two women, both flawed, both learning. Finally, Emily spoke. "I've been seeing a counselor. She's helping me untangle things. The way I grew up thinking you'd always fix everything. The way I measured love by what you gave instead of who you were." She paused. "I think I was angry at you for reminding me I had to grow up." I looked at her, my heart swelling with something deeper than forgiveness, understanding. "I was angry at myself for letting you believe that love was something to earn," I said softly. "We both did what we thought love was. Now we know better." She nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "Can we start over?" "Always," I whispered. We sat on the couch, Lily between us, drawing with crayons while Emily and I talked for hours about ordinary things, not just wounds. She told me about her new job, about how Mark was working on rebuilding their finances without my help. There was a new humility in her words, but also pride, earned pride. For the first time, I saw my daughter as a woman standing on her own feet, not a child leaning on mine. As the sun dipped low, she turned to me and said, "You know, I used to think you were cruel for cutting us off. But now I see you gave us the chance to grow. It hurt, but it was the kindest thing you could have done." I reached out, taking her hand. That's what motherhood is, Emily. Not protecting them from every fall, just teaching them how to stand up again. She squeezed my hand tightly, her tears falling freely now. You stood up for yourself, and somehow that taught me to stand too. We didn't need to say more. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore, it was whole. Later that evening, after they left, I stood at the door watching their car disappear down the road. The world was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now, not empty, but fulfilled. I walked back inside, lit a candle, and sat by the window. On the table beside me lay Lily's drawing, 3 figures holding hands under a yellow sun. She had drawn me smiling, and beside me, Emily smiling too. I traced the little crayon lines with my fingertip, my heart full. For years, I had believed that my worth came from what I could give away. But now I understood, true love, true motherhood, true womanhood came from what you chose to keep. Your dignity, your boundaries, your voice. Outside, the wind stirred through the maple trees. The same wind that once howled through lonely nights now sounded like laughter. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me, a lullaby of strength, freedom, and forgiveness. When I finally went to bed, I didn't feel like the woman who had been left behind. I felt like the woman who had finally come home to herself.